When we fetch our recipe, and I then load the details and we reload, you see that this doesn't work. And that is related to our recipes resolver. This is responsible for actually triggering the fetch recipes call when we try to visit one of these recipe detail pages. We can check our routing file for that. There you see that on the ID and the ID edit files, we normally use the resolver to resolve our data. But that simply fails here, and hence we can't successfully load these pages because we're still using the data storage service for fetching here. That is currently correct. We're also doing that from the header component. There, if you take a look, we also use the data storage service. And now the next goal will simply be that we manage this through effects. Now for that, let's go to our recipes effects file and let's export a class, recipe effects. And in that class, we need to inject something from @ngrx effects, if you remember. And that something is the actions observable. So from @ngrx effects, let's inject it here. Again, I will use actions with the $sign, but that is optional. The type is actions. Now with that added, we can add effects as properties in the recipes effects class here. Let's start with the fetch recipes effect. We need to add the @effect decorator, which is also imported from @ngrx effects. And the value we store here is this actions and then pipe. And now, first of all, we need to filter for a specific action that should trigger this effect. And for that, let's add such an action. That would be, for example, fetch recipes. You can name this however you want. And the identifier could be recipes, fetch recipes. Let's export a class, fetch recipes, which implements action. And on that class here, we only need the read-only type because we need no extra payload for fetching recipes. So back in the effects file, now here I want to pipe of type, which also needs to be imported from @ngrx effects. And I'm looking for my actions. So I import everything as recipes actions from recipes actions file. And I'm looking for my recipes actions fetch recipes action, of course. When this action occurs, I want to kick off this effect here. So of type is the first step in our pipe here. The second step now is that we send our HTTP request to fetch the recipes. For that, let's use a switch map here, imported from RxJS operators. We did the same in the off section, if you remember. Here, for example. And let's go to the data storage service where we have the logic for sending this request. And we can simply copy this code here for sending a GET request. So let's, first of all, expect our fetch action data here. Though we don't really need that, so you could also use an empty argument list here because we, well, are not interested in any arguments. We're not getting a payload from that action anyways. And now since I want to use the HTTP client here, we need to inject this as well. So HTTP client is injected from @angularcommon/HTTP. And we also need the recipe model here. So import recipe from the recipe model file. The URL here still should be correct. And with that, we have logic to send that request. But let's see what else we're doing in the data storage service. There, we're also mapping the response. And that is, of course, something I want to do in the effect too. So I'll just copy that map operator. And of course, therefore, also imported here from RxJS operators. And then in here, we still get our recipes. We map that, transform this as before. And once we're done with all of that, as before, the goal is to return a new action, which will then be dispatched automatically. We can use another map operator for this, where we get our recipes. And now what action should be returned here? Well, that would of course be our set recipes action. So a new recipes action set recipes object is required, and there we pass our recipes as a payload. And this again will then automatically be dispatched by NGRX effects. Now for these effects to be considered, we need to register them in the app module. So there in the effects module, we have to add the recipes effects. And for that, of course, an import has to be added here. So import recipes effects from, and now let's go to /recipes store recipe effects. Am I not exporting it there? Recipe effects without an S. So it's recipe effects, which needs to be added here in the app module. And with that, NGRX effects will automatically load this effects class here and set up all these observable listeners. So with that, we have these listeners. Now we just have to dispatch fetch recipes to use them. And one additional note, I also need to add injectable here to the recipe effects class, which is imported from Angular core, to make sure that things can be injected into this class. So with that, let's dispatch fetch recipes. And there are two places where this needs to be done. The first place is the data storage service. Or to be precise, the place where we called the data storage service in the past. And that would be the header component. In there, I already inject the store, which is great. So in onFetchData, we can go right ahead and use the store to dispatch our action. All we need to do is import our recipe actions. So import everything as recipe actions from recipes store recipes actions. And with that imported here, we dispatch new recipes recipe actions dot fetch recipes like this. So let's give this a try first before we work on the resolver. The app reloaded, and if I click fetch data, that looks pretty good to me. Now this is handled through NGRX and not through our service anymore. Let's now work on the resolver, and this is a bit more tricky. In the resolver, we also called fetch recipes in the past. The thing just is, the resolver actually expects an observable as a return value here on the resolve method, and it waits for this observable to complete before it loads the route for which you added this resolver. The problem is, when we dispatch an action, we don't get back an observable. Therefore, resolve would instantly resolve, and we would instantly load a route where the data is actually not there yet. Now, there are workarounds, and I want to explore one workaround with you here. First, we need to inject our store, and we won't need the data storage service anymore. So let's inject the store here instead, import it from @ngrx store, of course. And let's also import everything as from app from our root app reducer here, so that we can inject this and assign this generic type like this. And of course, we also need actions, so let's import everything as recipes actions or recipe actions. I think I named them in a different file. You can, of course, name them whatever you want. From the recipes area, the store there, and there the recipe actions file. Now here, instead of returning this fetch recipes call, I will call this store dispatch and now create a new action based on my recipes actions for fetch recipes. Now again, the thing is I can't return this because this does not yield an observable. Instead, we want to wait for the effect that is triggered by that action to complete. And there is a neat little way of doing that. Keep in mind that in recipe effects, in the end, we filter for specific actions and then we run logic. Now, it turns out that you can use this filtering logic and this actions observable provided by NGRX effects in any class, not just in such a effects class, and also without the effect decorator. That just is all required for NGRX effects to do other useful things for you, like automatic unsubscribing and so on. But we can also abuse these features in a different class. And here, indeed, in my resolver, I want to import actions and of type from @ngrx effects. Now what does this allow me to do? We can inject our actions here, just as we do it in the effects class. And now here, we can return this actions pipe of type and now listen to a specific action to occur to complete this observable, basically, or to trigger this observable. And that specific action I'm interested in is simply my set recipes action. When that is called, I know that recipes are there. And therefore, this is the action I want to listen for. So here, I will use my recipes actions, set recipe action as a trigger. Now we also need to add the take operator from RxJS operators here to take only one value so that we then complete and unsubscribe from the subscription and have no ongoing subscription. We're only interested in this event once. And we're good. And now the resolver dispatches this, but then also waits for recipes to be set. Now let's give this a try. If we now fetch our data, we go here to the ingredient page, that works. And if I reload this page, I still end up on /recipes. Well, let's fix this in a second. First of all, let me show you that our logic works though. If we use the Redux DevTools here, if I fetch my data, we see fetch recipes, set recipes here. If I now click on the ingredients, we see that triggered again. So here's the first set when I manually loaded that, and here is when I visit a detail page. So our resolver kicks in and does its job, which is great. We fetch the latest information. However, when I reload, we are redirected. And that's actually not directly related to the resolver. Instead, it's related to the auth effects, where I redirect whenever we logged in here. When we have an authentication success, which is also the case after an auto login, I navigate. Now, we probably want to tweak this a little bit. We should only do that if we have an authentication success outside of the auto login mechanism. Or, to handle it differently, in auth actions for authenticate success, we can add a new item here to the payload, and that could be redirect, which is a Boolean. Now we can go to the effects, and when we auto log in, we can set redirect to false. I don't want to redirect to that default page. I only want to do this up here in the normal handle authentication function for manual login and sign up. There we can set redirect to true. Now what's the advantage of this? Now we can go to our auth redirect effect here, where we redirect after a successful login. And actually what we do get here is our auth success action. So here we can then simply check if auth success action, and I should set a type here to get better auto-completion. The type here will be auth actions authenticate success. If my payload here includes redirect, or it will include that, but if it is true, only if it is true, I will call navigate, otherwise we won't. With that, let's first of all log in manually. That works as before. And now if I fetch data and I reload here on the detail page, you see that now also works. We stay on that page and the data here is loaded without any errors.